The Horticultural Society of Chicago, now the Chicago Horticultural Society, was founded in 1890 with many public-spirited women as members. In the mid-1900s, they proposed a women's board to assist in raising funds, recruiting members, and helping further the goal of the society, permanent headquarters and a garden to serve Chicagoland. The Society Board of Trustees approved the creation of the Women's Board in 1951.
The Chicago Botanic Garden would not be what it is without the Women's Board. The Women's Board history begins well before the history of the Chicago Botanic Garden, and the Women's Board has been investing in and leaders of everything the Chicago Botanic Garden has done throughout its 40 years.
In 1972, after years of planning and hard work, the Chicago Botanic Garden opened to the public in Glencoe, chosen for its auto and rail accessibility, lack of pollution, and the natural beauty of the Skokie Marsh. Listing all of the Women's Board initiatives would be daunting. However, one of the first projects the Women's Board developed was a fragrant garden for the blind in Chicago.
The Women's Board planted that garden their very own selves on their hands and knees.
One of the fundraising projects used to finance this garden was the royalties from longtime board member Edith Farwell's book, Have Fun with Herbs. When first visited by William Pullman, then president of the Horticultural Society, the fragrant garden clarified his dream, a true botanic garden.
Well, Mr. Pullman was really the shining light in the starting of this new garden that had been talked about for so long.
Early education efforts included a lending library. In the Society's office at 116 South Michigan in the early 50s, Women's Board members began clipping articles from magazines. Desiring to grow these clippings into an actual library, in 1967, the Women's Board turned to plant sales as fundraisers. From a member's garden, to the Wilmette Carson Peary Scott parking lot, to the Chicago Botanic Garden, the sales grew.
Well, the first plant sale we used to have in Mrs. Farwell's driveway, and we didn't buy plant. People brought their own plants. It was a very, very modest affair.
My first plant sale was down in the sheds where the Women's Board would gather, and we were selling all kinds of house plants. When it came down to the actual time of the sale, going out to mark the parking lot was the first big endeavor. Some of the plants were grown here, but other plants were coming in on trucks, and so the process began really Monday morning with a crew of women in the morning, unloading trucks and delivering them off to all of the sections that had been marked off.
But with any plant sale, you've got to talk about the weather.
We had lots of rain and hail, and I can remember one sale when they had a boat that they were using because so much rain had come in.
Proceeds from these early plant sales were dedicated to creating the library. In 1976, in the garden's newly constructed education building, now the Regenstein Center, those clippings had grown to a library of 6,000 books, many of them made possible by an endowment from member June Reedy's family. The Women's Board also established the garden shop in Regenstein, and it still provides significant funds for the garden.
When the board said, after having opened the garden, now we need a building, and they said there's going to be an auditorium, a classroom, there will be greenhouses, an exhibit hall, a restaurant, and the Women's Board said, wait, you're missing something. We need a shop. So the problem for the Women's Board was to figure out, well, where could we put a shop? And guess what? They found a closet. And that was the original shop. The Women's Board did everything. They chose the bookshelves, they brought in a desk for the manager. They did all the planning. It was our shop. The Women's Board ran the retail business at the garden for 25 years.
In 1986, the Women's Board introduced the Zimmerman Lecture Series, a successful educational program named in honor of Zodi Zimmerman.
She was president of the Women's Board of the Botanic Garden, and because she was such an excellent botanist and speaker, and she did so much for the garden, we wanted to remember her.
The 1990s were a busy decade for the Women's Board. During that time, the board was instrumental in creating and dedicating the English walled garden.
I flew to England, to London, and I was trying to find a designer, and everyone said, John Brooks, you must get John Brooks. So I went to call on John Brooks, and he said, oh, I'd love to do it. I've always wanted to do a modern English garden. And of course, I said, that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for a traditional English garden.
While opening a major garden is a special event, dedicating it with Her Royal Highness Princess Margaret in attendance caused quite a stir.
Princess Margaret had on the most beautiful, I guess you would call it royal blue coat. But beforehand there was an elegant and beautiful bagpiper who piped the honored guest in.
The big thing was that everybody was alerted, as Brooks knows, to get barley water because that's what she loved.
But we didn't know what it was at the time.
Nobody knew what it was.
It was Janet's husband who figured out what it was. It was Scotch whiskey. It was to be neat and a tumbler full of it.
The 90s also saw the resurrection of educational fundraising trips for Women's Board members to noteworthy gardens.
Both trips, I asked all the women to bring their best Southern hat. So they did, and we wore them for the first dinner, a cocktail dinner party in Charleston. We worked so hard. I've never known a board that works as hard as the Women's Board has over the years and is more dedicated, and it was something that was fun that we could do, that we enjoyed together.
The board sent Kris Jarantoski abroad for a plant collecting trip. This trip also served as an introduction of the Chicago Botanic Garden to the international horticultural world.
It's called Collections 2000. It started in 1995, and it was over 5 years. First it was Netherlands, then Germany, then England, then Japan, Poland, and Czech Republic and Hungary. And this was a trip to go to Europe and buy plants that you couldn't buy in the United States, commercially available, and build our collections and make the garden a better place.
In 1997, with the help of Women's Board members Jeanie Van Nice, Penny Horn, and Julie Priebe, a new fundraiser inspired by Longwood Gardens called A Rare Fair was born.
We decided that we would do it a little bit differently than Delaware. We wanted to have a seated dinner where we could have a live auction with an auctioneer. As to the most rare and unusual plant, I would say that the things that came from the collecting trips, the ones to Russia, brought back a number of very fine plants that were going to be put out to the public.
The thing I love about the event is that it's a room full of people just like me who really love plants and really love gardening.
Members Missy Shennan and Vicki Verity traveled to Holland to explore the possibility of a bulb sale. Bulbs were blooming, and so were ideas. The annual Bulb Festival that resulted remains a favorite fundraiser for the Women's Board today. Missy recounts the early days.
The first bulb sale was in our big parking lot, which I call our parking lot. And it was interesting because we had to figure out how to sell everything. We had to figure out how to package, how to label everything. I mean, it was amazing, and we were all so elated by the fact that it had worked and we had figured out the systems. The first day as we were packaging the bulbs, we looked around the curb of the parking lot and saw a lot of squirrels and chipmunks. A lot. They were just waiting there to, invade the whole sale as soon as we left.
Since that time, it's evolved into being a part of a big festival that we hold at the garden each fall.
The Bulb Festival is all about not cut plants, but plants that you put in the garden that can colonize, that can make such an extraordinary experience for not only your family, your community, but anyone who's just passing by.
With their 2000 gala, featuring Lester Lannon's band, the Women's Board focused on the Botanic Gardens School Garden Initiative, providing funds for inner-city school gardens and their maintenance.
Our goal was to have 7 gardens that people would purchase for different inner-city schools. We netted $500,000. The Women's Board did all the designing. We wrapped all the tent poles. It was beautiful.
In 2001, the Women's Board celebrated its 50th anniversary. At that time, the Women's Board was contributing to their $1 million endowment for the curator of aquatics. The garden's Great Basin and water gardens were under development. To date, the Women's Board has endowed $3.5 million for 5 projects. In 2007, the board chaired a preview party for the new Wonderland Express holiday exhibit. With its multi-themed dining rooms, the all-aboard party continues to be a very important fundraiser for the board.
This is a nice way to all come together to support the garden and to really enjoy it.
In 2014, the Women's Board hosted a preview party for a new garden event, the Orchid Show.
It was tremendously, astoundingly beautiful. You entered into the display and it was full of color in the midst of one of Chicago's most horrible winters.
They were awestruck by the color, by the scents, by the freshness. It was really a treat.
Collectively a force of philanthropy, Women's Board members have always been generous individual supporters of the Botanic Garden as well. While too numerous to mention them all, donations include the Brown family's Waterfall Garden, Edith Farwell's Herb Garden, the Linnaeus Statue and Heritage Garden, donated by Gertrude Nilsson, the Learning Garden for the Disabled, which Elsie Sutter instigated and funded, and recently the Grunsfeld family's gift of Spider Island in tribute to Sally Grunsfeld. 2 members, Nancy Race and Janet Poore, have served as chairs of the Board of Directors of the Chicago Horticultural Society.
It's evolved from a group of women who were primarily interested in gardening and flower arranging and matters horticultural in a wider sense, and now we have businessmen and businesswomen, financiers, public relations people, all of who are members of the board, who are bringing their expertise to the board, and then we have the gardeners as well. So it's a wonderful cross-fertilization, I think, of talents that is manifest in the kind of things that we now do at the garden.
When we all come together and work together, we build some wonderful friendships and loyalties, really, to the board, to what we've done and what we have accomplished. It has a great deal of pride to it. So it's a family, if you will, of very committed women.
Honoring the legacy of past generations of the Women's Board who helped to bring this garden to life, we are very pleased to announce the sum total of our gifts to the Chicago Botanic Garden are now in excess of $10 million.
Today, the Women's Board continues to attract and inspire creative and dedicated women. Current members include a centenarian who has danced with Mickey Rooney, a retired CIA agent, and many other extraordinary women. However diverse the background of its members may be, together, the Women's Board of the Chicago Horticultural Society achieves results of tremendous benefit to the Chicago Botanic Garden. All members, veterans as well as newcomers, continue to proudly work together to further our mission, supporting the Chicago Botanic Garden through the advancement of conservation, education, and horticulture.